The Italian government, French government, with normal interest rates, they probably like 4 or 5%, which is like normal traditionally, they would not be able to continue, but would have to default. And the tragedy of the euro comes now in that not only the Greek government can do it, but also the Italian, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the German, they all can exploit in this way the purchasing power of the euro, and therefore there's a tragedy of the commons. Pure gold standard, maybe you save first gold coins and then you buy your house. Today it does not make very much sense to save cash and then in 10 years buy your house.
Professor Bagus, it's a pleasure to have you here. What's the tragedy of the euro, and how come the euro is to blame for the European debt crisis? Most people will put the blame on bankers or capitalism, animal spirits. So why the single currency? What's the tragedy of the euro?
Well, the pleasure is mine. Well, the tragedy of the euro, I've called this phenomenon like this because it's like a tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons occurs when one resource can be exploited by many people, by several persons. One example are stocks of fish in the ocean that are not owned by anyone, and anyone can fish who wants. No? If one fisher would privately own the stock of fish, he would fish maybe only so much that the stock of fish could recuperate itself because he owns the capital stock of the stock of fish and could sell it. But if there are several persons who can fish, the incentive is to fish as much as they can, because otherwise the others will exploit the resource. And this leads to an overexploitation, and at the end the resource can disappear. And the same happens with the euro. Here the commonly owned resource is the purchasing power of the euro, how much value it has. How can it be exploited? By running government deficits and monetizing it through the European central banking system. For example, when the Greek government has a deficit, spends more than it receives in taxes, for the difference it can print paper and write on its Greek government bond. Then Greek banks can buy these government bonds and bring these government bonds to the ECB and get in return new reserves, and on top of these reserves the Greek banking system can expand credits, expand the money supply. So the deficit is indirectly monetized, more euros are produced, so prices will rise, the purchasing power of the euro will fall. And this is very attractive for the Greek politician because he can expand government expenditures to buy votes, for example, and part of the costs are externalized in form of a lower purchasing power of the euro, higher prices, because prices do not rise only in Greece. They will start to rise also in other countries. So part of the costs are borne by, for example, Italians and Germans who see that prices rise. And the tragedy of the euro comes now in that not only the Greek government can do it, but also the Italian, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the German, they all can exploit in this way the purchasing power of the euro, and therefore there's a tragedy of the commons.
But do you think that the euro is doomed? There were many attempts to save the euro, to fix the European debt crisis. Many countries went to programs. They went out successfully, most of them, except Greece. There was banking union, people debating fiscal union. So do you think that these structural weaknesses can be fixed and eventually not to leave a tragedy of the euro, but somehow save it?
Yeah, one way is to make governments not to use this way to finance itself. For example, putting a limit on the deficit the government can have. This was the idea of the Stability and Growth Pact. The problem was that if someone infringed on the rules, nothing happened, no sanction. Then they promised to make it harsher in 2011, 2012 with the fiscal compact. But again, we see the same happening. We see countries not adhering to the rules, and nothing happens. So it looks like that these options to restrict does not work, even though there has been, developments in the right direction. Like some countries have reduced very much their government expenditures, like Ireland or Greece also, and there have been reforms, but it may not be enough. Some reforms are not doable because the resistance in the population that got accustomed to the welfare state and all the privileges for labor unions and so on, they are not willing to accept these reforms and vote for parties that want to abolish them.
So you say that whatever rules that we create, there will be always fishermen who exploit the fish.
Yeah, it's just an agreement between fishers that say, hey, there's a problem, let's fish only so much. But then when they fish more, nobody comes and says, no way. There's even an incentive of all the fishers that fish more to say, let's group together and tell these guys who have adhered to the rules that no problem, do it yourself. So the only way would be to create a super fisher, a European super state that controls fiscal policy, that maybe issues euro bonds, that socializes the debts and the fiscal spending. To introduce European superstates, and there have been important steps in this direction, like the banking union and so on.
We happen to live in a strange world of zero interest rates, or even negative interest rates. And you had an interesting paper calling it a trap, a zero interest rate policy trap. So why is this policy a trap?
Because what you would have to do in such a situation where you have malinvestments and there's a recession, you would have to liquidate the malinvestments as fast as possible, get rid of pay down the bad debts or default on them. What the zero interest rate policy does is to maintain artificially these malinvestments, especially the governments, the Italian government, French government. With normal interest rates, they probably like 4 or 5%, like normal traditionally, they would not be able to continue, but would have to default. And this would bring into a big problem the banking system that is loaded with government bonds and other companies that are leveraged very highly. If they would have to, and the malinvestments, if they have to pay higher normal interest rates, they go bust. So the low interest rates, the zero interest rates, or negative interest, actually incentivize to maintain the debt level and even increase it. So then it gets ever more difficult to get out of the trap, because the debt levels are so high and they are all interconnected. The debtors are interconnected, the banking system, the governments, the companies. If one goes bust, then the bank goes bust, and then goes a government bust, because it has to bail out the bank, and it cannot, and the other banks go bust that have loaned to the government, and the companies that are in relation with the banks go bust. So it gets ever more difficult to raise interest rates because debt level get ever higher. In order to raise interest rates, you would need first a reduction of debt levels to a sustainable level. But the zero interest rates actually incentivize to have more debts, to have ever more debts. Therefore, it's like a trap, which is difficult to get out. Only with very harsh measures that are also discussed in the paper, you can have a bail-in to reduce the debt level, you have a partial default, you can have financial depression, you can have a one-time wealth tax where you tax away wealth to pay down government debts, and you can have a full-fledged currency reform, and then you can normalize.
And what are the side effects of these unconventional monetary policies? And I mean, the effects on entrepreneurship, on culture, on how we perceive our lives?
Yeah, in a fiat money system, then with ever increasing amounts of money and so low interest rates, artificially low interest rates, it makes sense to indebt yourself much more than like a pure gold standard. In a pure gold standard, maybe you save first gold coins and then you buy your house. Today, it does not make very much sense to save cash and then in 10 years buy your house. It makes much more sense to indebt yourself today, to buy the house, look how the housing price increases, and see that the debt's actually devalued by price inflation. So it makes sense to indebt you actually as high as you just can stand to buy a house, maybe a little bit.
Level and on a personal level.
Yes, yes. So this means that people are much more indebted than they would be in a free monetary system, a pure gold standard, for example. So and then you would have to ask what are the effects of this over-indebtedness on culture. It means that the more debts you have, the more dependent you are on your creditors. Creditors actually make you rules. You're dependent on that the creditor will roll over the debt when it comes due. So you're less independent. You're less free in some sense, and also it's like a huge rucksack on your back. You have the debt always there, and you have to service it. That is, you cannot just take a sabbatical, or you cannot afford maybe not even several months of unemployment, but you just have to get immediately another job. You cannot take a trip around the world. You have to, relatively speaking, activities that bring you money are more important to you. Activities that don't bring you money, voluntary work, for example, time with your family, time with your friends, deep discussions, debates with friends, spiritual activities that get less important. More important gets to make money, and it may get so important to you that you might violate traditional moral rules. You may get a manager that is highly indebted, that just looks at the short-term interest to make as much money as you can. And then we get to the companies. It's the same. For one, companies are led by managers that probably personally are highly indebted. Therefore, they look also on making as much money as they can, because they have the debts very high. And thanks to this leverage buyouts, that you can just buy other companies with new money, companies change more frequently hands, so there's more difficult to get a long-term relationship of trust between the owners and the workers and the managers, like in traditional family companies, for example. So people get more materialistic, more short-term sighted. And one thing, of course, is also that entrepreneurship gets more dependent on the monetary system. Yeah. It gets very important to get fast access to cheap money, and have a good relationship to your bank. Other activities get relatively less important, and it's an advantage for established companies, relatively, because established companies have a better connection with the banking system. They know them, and they have collateral. They can have maybe collateral, like how some infrastructure that they can pledge as collateral. They have more assets, so they get easier access to the new money than someone who just wants to start a new company and has no asset to provide. So is the fiat monetary system in this sense gives an advantage to established, old, big companies to the detriment of new, innovative companies. So entrepreneurship gets less dynamic.
So if we again look at the status quo that we're in, the euro is a tragedy, zero interest rate policies are a trap, and the culture, entrepreneurship culture is changing, and it's not changing in a good way because of all of that. How do you see the future, the next 10 years? Are we going to live another lost decade, like the Japanese?
Well, all questions to the future are very difficult, because the future depends on all human actions, that what people will do. People, I don't even know what I will do tomorrow exactly. So how will I know what other people will do in the next 10 years? Sometimes we are too pessimistic, and we don't see the huge creativity and strength of individual entrepreneurs who get up early in the morning to try to satisfy consumers, try to produce innovative products at lower prices, try to, if they have a problem, to fix it. They are working all the time for a better future. We have this very strong power, and sometimes we underestimate this strong power that improves the future, and then we have all this destructive power of the monetary system and the government. Of course, without all these negative influences by the monetary system and the government, the next decade would be much more flourishing. And in this sense, we can say that it's a lost decade.
So can you just tell us a few words about the new book that's coming out? What's the title, the main?
Yeah, my new book, written with Andreas Marquardt, who is a German economist. It's called Blind Robbery: How the central banks and the government steal your money. And it tries to explain to ordinary citizens, actually to people who have no knowledge on economics, all the problems of our monetary system, the cultural problems, the unfair redistribution, that it benefits the super rich and increases inequality in its sense. It explains the business cycle, how the government can grow to a size that is unsupportable for individual liberty. It tries to explain it with examples, stories, and in a provocative language to get people to read it, to get convinced, to give it to their friends so that the good word can spread, because this is the only way that we can change our monetary system.
Do you think it's easier to explain it now, after the crisis, than it was in 2006 or 2007?
It's easier to get people who may be interested in this stuff after the crisis. So in this sense, it's easier, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. You're welcome.